Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a great week. Spring has officially arrived and most of our snow has finally also melted. The last of the ice on our local trails has started to melt and Garu and I are really enjoying getting out for our daily walks. Spring is not only a time of rebirth, but for me it also brings a lot of inspiration. This week, inspiration is leading me to another watercolor abstract. With spring in the air, I really feel like working with bright colors, so I'm going to use some of my favorite colors to create this painting. The painting I'm creating is going to be a diptych, and as you can see, I've taped 2 pieces of watercolor paper to my plexiglass. And the reason I tape my paper down is that it helps to prevent it from buckling, and this makes it easier for me also when I'm working so that my paper doesn't move around. Once I'm satisfied with the first layer of paint, I let it dry and then I start to work on intensifying the colors. Even though I'm intensifying the colors at this point, I'm still using a fair amount of water because I want to make sure that this layer doesn't dry very quickly so that I can blend other colors into it, like this darker color I'm applying right now. When the paint on the paper is still wet, any color that's applied right next to it will bleed into it, and I like the effects that this creates. As per usual, when I'm working intuitively like this, I don't really have a set plan, so I'm figuring things out as I'm going along. When I feel like the water isn't moving the paint enough for me, I pull out my spray bottle and I add a few spritzes of water to move the paint more intentionally. As you can see, the water has created some really interesting shapes. And now I want to go in and add a few more colors, create a little bit more contrast by darkening up my colors, and I'm starting to follow the lines of the different shapes that the water has created. And I'm doing this in a very intuitive way. I don't, again, have a really set idea on what I want to create. I'm following the lines in the paint and letting that guide me in my process. I probably mentioned this in most of my videos, if not all of them, but contrast is a very important tool to use when creating a painting. It can really help to improve the overall composition of a painting. It can also draw attention to a focal point. Really, the list of reasons why contrast is important can go on and on. But one important thing to remember is just that it's important for you to include contrast in your painting. It will really help to make your colors pop and make your painting more interesting. After adding these beautiful dark lines, I looked at the upper portion of my painting and I kind of felt like the color was a little bit too dull. So I used some of my nickel azo gold and I added a light wash of it over that top part of the painting. And I really feel like it helped to create more visual interest, and it really makes the sky, if you will, my abstract sky, pop more. Creating contrast is done by using dark values of color and light values of color. So here I'm using some white to add a little bit more contrast yet again. Not only am I creating contrast using white in this situation, I'm also creating contrast by using my white to create different shapes than the ones that are already in my painting. For me, the more simple I can keep my process, the better it is. When I keep things relatively simple, it also makes it more relaxing. I love creating in this way. I want it to be a relaxing process. I don't want it to be something that adds more pressure to my life. For me, when things are simple and relaxing, they also tend to be more fun. And creativity for me seems to always go better when I'm having fun. I usually do something creative every single day, but there are some days when I'm either tired or if I'm not feeling well, where it really feels like I'm forcing the process. And when I start to force the process, it doesn't seem to flow quite as well. So that's usually my sign that it's time for me to let things go and to pay attention to what I need to pay attention to and just focus on self-care, I guess. As I'm sure you can attest, there's nothing very complicated to what I'm doing right now. I've been adding some vertical lines, and right now I'm just using some simple dots to continue creating contrast in my painting. The contrast is, again, not just being created by using color, but it's also created by using different shapes that contrast with the other shapes that are in the painting. I'm feeling satisfied with the elements I've created in white. Now I'm going to use a black pen to start creating some more contrast again, using black ink. Using my black pen, I'm simply going to be doing some stippling. And if you're not 100% sure what stippling is, it's basically a drawing technique in which areas of light and areas of shadow are created using nothing but dots. The closer each of the dots are to each other, the darker the areas are, and the more dissipated the dots are, the less there's shadow. When I'm working intuitively like this, I also like to turn my painting around, and this helps me work more easily, especially when I'm filming and I'm trying to keep things relatively stable. But it also gives me a different perspective on the painting, and it gives me different ideas on different details that I could add as I'm moving along. Here I'm using a fine tip black pen to add some very fine details in the background. They're not very obvious, but when you get close to the painting, you can see them and they add a little bit more visual interest. I'm always collecting things that I believe can help me create different types of textures. So here I've gathered a few different tools that I've collected over the years. This here is a chopstick, and I also have a few sculpting tools. And I'm just going to create some dots of gold in the bottom half of my painting. Then, using a fine tip brush, I'm adding a few different details with more of that gold in some sections of the painting that I feel could benefit from having a little bit more of that gold. It's very pretty on the bottom, but I want to spread it so that it's not completely concentrated just on the bottom of my painting. Painting intuitively, I don't usually set out with a plan. So I didn't really have this idea in mind that this would turn into a landscape. But the more I painted and as I went along, it seemed to look more and more like an abstract landscape to me. So I've decided to add some abstract stars in my sky. Now I'm feeling satisfied that my paintings are done, so it's time for me to remove the tape and do my final reveal. Let's move in a little closer to see some of those details I've created. The last few weeks my channel has really grown quite a bit, and I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for liking my videos, for subscribing, and for encouraging me along the way. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!